All right.
Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us on this webinar. My name is Anat. I'm head of academic partnerships at Ment.io. I'm really glad that you could join us today. I've been teaching for almost 20 years as adjunct professor in different courses in different universities. And I think it's been around 10 years that I've seen, that I've observed that either I harness technology to help with the teaching, or I have to fight constantly against laptops, mobiles, and everything else that has been introduced to the education world. So I've been on the search for technology. That's how I encountered Ment.io. I fell in love with the platform, joined the company, and now I am extremely lucky to be in contact with so many of our users around the world, all sharing a similar mindset of how do we use technology to improve higher education and education in general. I'm super fortunate today to have with us Professor Allon from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. Professor Allon is a Jeffrey Caswin Professor of Operations, Information, and Decisions. He is the Director of Management Technology Program at the University of Pennsylvania and teaches courses on scaling tech ventures and operation strategy to undergrads and MBA students at the Wharton School of Business. And we're super, super glad to have you here, extremely excited. What we'll do today is we'll ask Professor Allon to share his experience with us on using discussion platforms. Then we'll open the floor for questions. You might notice, and this is just one small comment that I'd like to make, you might notice that you have a chat option and a Q&A option. You're very welcome to use them both, and we'll be happy. We have members of the Ment team, of the Ment.io team here, who will be answering the chat live, and we'll discuss the different questions on the Q&A after God's presentation. So the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Anat. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me well? Okay, very good. So just brief introduction before I get into the presentation itself. So again, I'm faculty at the Wharton School at Penn. I'm the Director of Management and Technology Program. I was at Kellogg for many years at Northwestern, so teach both undergrad MBA, executive MBA, PhD. At Kellogg, I was one of the faculty. I was advising the provost on education technology. So I've seen education technology from multiple angles, both seen the wealth of things out there. I was at Northwestern when they chose. In fact, I was chairing the committee on choosing Canvas. And so the reason I'm saying that is that I'm a faculty. I teach. That's where I spend most of my time. But I also see many of these options around and understand some of the complexities of trying to adopt things, and so happy to talk about that and what does that mean and the process to do that. Before I get to the presentation itself, maybe a little bit on why I started using Ment. And so I was, to be honest, throughout the year was somewhat disillusioned with using discussion boards. And the reason for that is that I usually saw discussion boards as if it's really for if I don't force people to go there, then what I usually end up having is like 10 to 20 students in a discussion board having really, really interesting conversation. And these people have amazing stuff to say, and I want to bring it to the classroom. But when I bring it to the classroom, most of the other students have never gone there. At least when they have a discussion in the classroom, everybody can hear everything. At the same time, if I force people to go to discussion board, what I ended up having, and most of the discussion board I use until now, and I use everything from Piazza to I use Slack as a discussion board. I use almost everything possible out there. Of course, Canvas is a discussion board, a Blackboard, Moodle. A lot of what you see is noise. And so what I really liked when I saw and I did early discussion with the founders of Ment was that it really forces people to think deeper on what they post. And what I'm going to try to do is walk you through a little bit through how I use Ment, how it's sort of like posing the overall flow of the course, but it's not alien to the course. But then open it up to whatever question people have. Some of the question, of course, will be better answered by the people from the firm, from the team. But I'm happy to talk about my experience and be as candid as possible. So let me go and share my screen. Okay, do that. Okay. So hopefully you can see my screen. That's my Canvas site. And that's a Canvas site for a course that was entirely online. I should say that I started using Ment before COVID. You know, we divide the world now into pre-COVID, during COVID. Hopefully there will be an era of post-COVID. So in the pre-COVID area, I already used Ment. I'm going to show you now a class that started during COVID. So it started, in fact, right after spring break, where the announcement was that we're moving everything online. So Ment is integrated, but I'll show you later on discussion board that actually happened in a hybrid class where we meet in person and continue some discussion online. So you can see here, this is actually the way I structure my class on Canvas, and I'm sure you can do the same on Blackboard and Moodle based on modules. And you'll see in week, for example, where I say module 1, download the slides, watch these videos, and then you have here discuss, is Rent a Runway scalable? And discuss, are scooters scalable? And for each one of these, what will happen is that we'll take them here, and there will be a link that will take them into Ment to have this discussion. So to some extent, the regular flow of the class during COVID will be read this case, discuss things on Ment, and then come ready to discuss the remaining of the discussion in the Zoom session. So that was a class that was a blended class between synchronous and asynchronous. So actually, this is actually a good example for a good discussion for one of the type of question I'm posing. And it's actually going to be a good opportunity to show what I see is one of the main values of Ment. So here's an example of my course is about scaling. So a lot of the discussion is about how different systems, configurations, physical and business model wise scale, and a lot of that is about tuning the students to think about both about the product and the business implication, both about the operational side as well as sort of like the more organizational side of that. But you can see here, so the question was a fairly open-ended question: are e-scooters, so the idea, are they scalable? The question, of course, had more background that in this case I didn't use because the question was sort of like obvious. And what you can see here, the students are the one that populated the answer. So Andy was one, Eduardo, and the like. And here we get really to at least what I find the most useful feature of Ment. So I instruct students when they go to a discussion to first of all try to look at the answer I've already given. So if the question is an open-ended question of this type, the answers can be anything that they can think of. But many times, if it's a case study, and I do the same for case studies, usually I already pre-populate the answers, and the answers can be yes, no, buy, don't buy, or something like that. But in an open-ended question like that, I think that I allow them to add the question, but I give them one requirement. The requirement should be you first of all have to read the answers and to make sure that your response is not the same as one that exists. In fact, if there is a thread, let me show you an example here for a thread, and that really is the main feature. That is the reason I'm using Ment. The students, before they respond to anything, have to first of all agree or disagree with whatever is already written. So you can see here some of these threads are really, really, really long threads, because what happened here is students have to start, have to read what happened until now, and take and continue that lift to a different place. Now, what it generates really, and that's, in my opinion, why this is vastly different than the existing discussion boards, is that the students, there is really very little room for them to post things that are absolutely noise, just to try to demonstrate that that's what they're doing. So most of the time, first of all, the fact that they have to agree, they have to read the answers and see if their answer is already there, and then they have to read and commit to agree or disagree, really create a well-structured discussion. By the way, that's the way I also tell them in the class. In the class, I tell them that they cannot just like add one more thing. You cannot just say, well, let me take what they said, but let me add one more thing. You have to agree, disagree, or you can ask for a clarification question. The same features existed on Ment before, of course, and so in a sort of like an analogous way to the way I'm teaching, and I find that extremely useful. So this is how the discussion look like. A student will come, will agree and disagree, and you can see here it evolves into a very, very elaborate discussion. What I like about that is, so first of all, it's one thing is that it generates a much deeper discussion. And by the way, this is actually something that my students are going to come and usually say at the end of the class. They'll say, we've used discussion boards until now, but we've never used a discussion board when we left the discussion actually where we learned something before even coming to class. There is actually really truly a deep discussion that we understand. For me as a faculty, what it allowed me to do, it allows me to go into the highlights, for example, and see many times I cannot really bring the entire depth of the discussion. And so I want to bring one or two people and bring them to a discussion. If I go back to what I said earlier, one of the main deficiencies that I see in many of the existing discussion boards is the fact that they almost like are created as a separate entity than what we do in the class. And I would like to bring some of that into the classroom and Ment through this highlight feature. I can do it easily. So just to show you, that's an example for one discussion. I can show you examples of other discussion that have similar idea here. For example, I asked the students something that is more open-ended, which was based on their experience, how do they model risk and think about risk in other places? And again, you can see a very elaborate discussion of people agreeing and disagreeing with other people on the usage of and how to model risk. So if I'll summarize very quickly, I'll say that to some extent, really the way, so I use that for really three reasons, or at least the type of questions I use. One is a discussion. I'm planning to have a discussion in the classroom, but I would like people to commit to something, engage in some discussion before they even come to class. A discussion on Zoom is possible, but is much more time consuming and harder to do. So I usually post a question that I'm planning to continue in the discussion in the classroom. Second one is there is a current event that I'm not sure I'll be able to bring to a discussion in the classroom, but I would like people to be able to discuss and commit. And the third one is really a type of question where we ended up somewhere in discussion. I would like the discussion to continue at home, maybe because, well, I'll give an example here. We had I'll show you that here. We had a speaker that came to a discussion. So here is a speaker that came from a firm, and I wanted people to comment on something that he commented. So he mentioned, for example, the fact that they didn't use any metrics in the firm. And I thought that was actually a really interesting strategy. I knew I would not have time to, that was actually, by the way, unlike the previous class, that was the class that actually met in person. I knew I would not have time to continue that in the next session. But I knew many people have things to say. I knew many people have interesting things to say. And I wanted to continue the discussion here. So it's either before the class or something that were orthogonal to the class or after class. Overall, the feedback from the students was, one, the fact that the fact that the discussion goes deeper than usual. So there's really much less noise. Two, you have people that hardly speak in the classroom. And that's actually important when we talk about, I teach classrooms that are very diverse in almost every possible dimension, gender-wise, race-wise, globally. And what I've seen with discussion boards of this type, primarily where one has to continuously read and engage by listening to other people, what I get, the comments I'm getting from students is that voices that are usually not being heard are now heard. So they will say, I've never heard Jenny before, but now Jenny actually had really an amazing response. In fact, many times I will highlight someone like that in the discussion in the classroom. So I would say as a discussion board, it actually really is doing a good job in elevating other voices. Now, you probably are looking here and you're seeing the numbers. So one thing, and I'm sure the Ment team can talk about that later on, I'm not using any of the numbers here to grade. I am telling the students that their activity on the discussion board on Ment may influence their grade on class contribution. And what I mean by that is I'm telling them they cannot replace completely the class contribution. So it's not they can be vocal here and absent there, and it will become absolutely 100%. But they do say that for many of them, their contribution on Ment is going to be valued when I think about class contribution, primarily if it's significant and if it's not just marginal, coming in different places and agreeing, disagreeing. But I am using these numbers. These numbers are sort of like and again, the Ment team, I'm sure, can comment more on that, are the credibility of that specific answer by looking at the weights of those who responded. I am showing that to the students, and that's sort of like a little bit, it adds a little bit to the level of students striving to get to a place where they are viewed as something that is valued by others. Other type of analytics that I'm showing the students, there is actually sort of like the ability to see who is usually commenting to whom and who is influencing whom. This is a big classroom, so it might be harder to show, but Evan indeed was the most contributing person in the classroom, and indeed Sophie was someone that was usually very early to provide responses. So showing a little bit the class configuration also is a way to visualize the students, something that they know, but now they can see that the system also sees it, I think is actually quite useful. So overall, I don't use this analytic that provided here to grade, but rather to supplement and to visualize what people see. I'll stop in just a minute, but I'll say the last thing I'll maybe show is the ease of creating an assignment. And then that's maybe, I think it's an important aspect here, which is if I take any class, it's really easy to add. And that's sort of like one of the, I usually, most of the classes, I created the content, even though I love students to do it themselves. So you can actually ask the question here. So the question can be, will Corona change forever? So I can actually, and then maybe usually if I do that, I'll have like something to say, given I can usually add an attachment, which is an article that just showed up somewhere. It doesn't have to be, but that's I usually do it. Now, if there are students that are already in part of the class, I can just add them here. But what I usually do, I just take the link and send it. And the last thing that I usually after that post a due date that is right before the class. And what it allows you to do is actually it just creates a more of a structure for the students. They get responses before. It's the way it's structured is that they see how things are coming towards the class, and it just adds slightly more structure than what they do. And that's it. It's posted, and I get responses when people are responding. I get also a constant monitor to the extent in which a discussion is dense enough, to what extent I need to send reminders to people. So overall, in terms of the useful features, it's easy to describe. But I think just to wrap up everything here before opening up for questions, is someone that was very leery on the usage of discussion boards, both for a physical in-person class and an online class. I find that as something that really elevates a discussion and really solves for some of the main issues we see with usual discussion boards. And at this stage, I'm happy to open up for whatever question people have for me or for the team, or if the team wants to talk more about their experience.
Thank you so much. It was very insightful and very, very interesting. I love hearing your experience about the platform. We'll turn to questions in just a minute. I wanted to share a little bit, just continuing what you have just said, just to share a few thoughts on that, and then ask what you think of that. One of them is regarding the assessment. The assessment is a fairly new feature on Ment.io. If you could release your shared screen, I'll share mine, and I'll just kind of share the concept. I agree with everything that you had said, and I would like to add to that the fact that two more comments. One is to say that the personal analytics that each student can view regarding what they are doing within the platform is very helpful in the sense of them understanding how they should be improving on the discussions. It reflects for them, and if you'll release your screen share, I'll add my own, and we'll be able to show, thank you. And I will show you what I mean. here, just a second. Here. You're seeing my screen, right?
Yep.
Thank you. So the only two comments that I wanted to make was to say, when the students have, from my experience and what I've been hearing as well, is the fact that students being able to see what type of actions they had taken on the platform, as well as the thought diversity in the classroom, which is super interesting, both for the instructor when we're composing working groups or breakout rooms and creating diversity of thought within the classroom. The students have the ability basically to look at the way that they are behaving on the platform and take that as an opportunity for personal growth. And the different elements that are used by the platform that the AI uses to assess and evaluate the different answers and the different participants are seen here also on the personal analytics page. So the students can see how they're doing in terms of sharing their reasoning on the different arguments, how balanced they are in their answers, how clear they are, how much they collaborate with others, how active they are, and also how much believability the AI is already assigning to their activities on the platform. And lastly, just touching upon that, is the fact that this is all being poured into this relatively new assessment feature, taking into account different quantity-based elements, such as number of actions that the students are taking, the answers by others that they have seen, just highlighting the collaboration that God, you spoke about, how much they engage with others, how many discussions they took part in, and a more quality-based component is how believable their answers are. And just to wrap this up and to say, I completely agree with you that it should be the instructor's decision what to do with this assessment that the AI is proposing. And we are supporting a download as CSV just to enable that, to play with the different weights and to enable the ability to say, okay, I understand that this is the assessment my students are receiving. I can use that as a participation score, or I can change the weights, or I can decide on assessing in a completely different manner. I think you said all the important things that I think are important and beautiful on the platform. There are many, many more, but let's open the floor to different questions. Can we see the questions on the screen? Or Tzvika, would you like to support by sharing the questions with us?
So actually there's one question that was asked by Mary Ellen, and I thought that maybe God should address that. Mary Ellen is asking how much and for what reasons does the professor add to the discussion? What other parts in the discussion besides adding the question you are taking part of? So God.
Yeah, that's a great question. At least initially, I interjected into a discussion sometimes to say, this is really, you should have posted that not as a response. That should be more as a new answer. That should have been more of a response, or interjecting into a discussion to say, I agree and disagree with things. And I realized over time that for the type of discussion that I do, and I absolutely qualify with that. When I say what I do, I mean discussion where I want them actually to evolve before I come and say and guide them more a different discussion. I prefer that I don't interject. And in fact, the discussion went deeper and people felt more comfortable agreeing and disagreeing with people when I was not part of the discussion. I haven't really run a randomized control trial on that, but my sense was that the best discussion where I was really hands off, either edited an answer or sometimes not even adding answers, just let it really flow, just gave them the instructions, the guardrails of saying, read before you add their answer, agree or disagree. And I tell them from the beginning, one of the issues I had in the beginning, people didn't like to disagree. So I had 60 responses, all of them agreeing, all of them essentially disagreeing, but starting by, I agree, but. And I said, no. I mean, I prefer that you disagree, but. And so then I had a much more, and that's how I find myself doing more coaching and providing guardrails rather than interjecting. But again, this might really hinge on the type of discussion that I'm sort of like keeping in at Ment. So I'm sure that other people may have a different discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks, God. I'm just seeing a question here from Nan, and I thought maybe addressing it here so everyone would hear. Nan is asking, does the platform allow the professor to rate students' responses as the professor reads them? So I think the human-machine interface as part of the platform is a key part, because we believe that eventually the professor is going to be the one who's rating the students, but we want to provide as much useful information as possible throughout the process. That's why Anat has presented, for example, the user analytics that with evidence about their collaborative level, about how credible they are, about how clear they are, and how balanced. And also, you can see items within the assessment feature that not only rates and scores the students' participation from a quantitative view, but actually tries to rate the quality of their responses and collaboration based on interaction in the course. This is all fed back into the professor as part of the assessment feature, and they can obviously use that for grading, take this into account, and modify it as needed.
And I'll add to that I find the two most useful ways to intervene with the discussion. I use the highlights that God had shown earlier to kind of skim through the discussion. And then if I feel that there is an intervention needed or directions needed, I use the announcement feature. And that is open, and it sends a notification to the email of all participants without me needing to comment directly to each participant. That's one way of doing that. And the additional way is once I feel that the discussion had been concluded with the AI assessment and everything of the different answers, I tend to close the discussions. I, again, look at what has been written in the discussion and create a closed discussion that the AI enables, and that's where the instructor's choice come into place, because the AI suggests the supporting answers, but I can tick a different box of a different answer that I find most appropriate to support the closing of the discussion. And so at the end of the day, the students understand that the human element is observing and guiding the discussion, but the AI is very supportive in helping us doing that. Vika, more questions?
Yeah, so I'm trying to address them as we go. So there's a question here from Melissa about how is the pricing structured. So I want to give that feedback to all participants. So we have packages that are based on either the number of courses that are licensed, but we are open and have some models also when there's a need to price this by the number of students. So we have both packages. And for the audience here, obviously, that joined us in the trial, and due to recent events with COVID, we will be able to issue some more discounts and promotions for you. And I sent here on the chat, you can contact us at webinars@ment.io, and anyone who wants a quote here can just explain what their current need for the coming semester, and we will surely be able to find a package that works for that. Another question here comes from Maria, and asking whether the product is designed for agree or disagree type of questions. I think it's actually broader than that, in the sense that any question type, whether it's ideation or brainstorming or selection between different ideas, is definitely a candidate for a question. The agree and disagree that you may see in the platform is served to support or to challenge individual answers or individual arguments within the questions. Again, this comes, and us all here being instructors on this call, you are surely realizing that knowledge is eventually a collection of arguments and counter-arguments, and it's our job to develop new knowledge. So encouraging people to agree and disagree with ideas is just a way to create better knowledge, and Ment.io is designed to encourage credibility of arguments, and that's why you see that in the product a lot. Gad, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, happy to comment on that. In fact, I would say many of the questions I put here are very open-ended. And so most of them don't necessarily even have a right or wrong answer. And in fact, they're not trying to get people to have the right or wrong answer. But the way I describe it to the students is a little bit like, I know we're in the US, but I describe it as a soccer game. I said the best discussion is that when people are not trying to score a goal by themselves, they're actually trying to pass to each other and trying to see what other people said and add and subtract and agree and disagree. So the debate is one where that goes, but ultimately, usually the class ends up in multiple places and primarily exposes the idea to each other. So I said, well, if someone tried to score and try to do something by themselves, usually they kick the ball out of the field, and my job is to go and run and bring it back so they can continue to play. So I prefer, in fact, if they try to make small passes and build an argument together. And in fact, as the class evolves, we see discussion go deeper with much more nuance back and forth. But I agree with what you just said. It's not my questions specifically on this platform are very open-ended.
And I also think that the ability of the students, which they identify very, very quickly as something similar to the social media, that their ability to upvote, downvote, mark as insightful, or ask for clarification is also super useful in that regard, because it enables them to say, okay, it's not that I necessarily think that this is the best argument, but I do recognize that it is insightful enough to receive that mark from me. So they have the ability to comment in multiple manners, I would say. Zvika?
So Jaffer is asking a fascinating question about how do you make students become addicts to learning, and how does Ment actually do that? I think it's very interesting, both from a learning process, but also from how to make sure that software you have provided students actually help them with their day-to-day flows, that it's correlated with their existing workflow and does not expect them to do things that they are not already doing. Obviously, everyone is busy and no one wants another software and another login and another screen to look at. That's why we believe that from day one, we have to be fully integrated with the environments that the students are already at. So whether it's Blackboard or Canvas or Moodle or any other LTI that was mentioned before, you don't need to maintain another password, and it took Gad pretty much a second to paste the discussion that he wanted to add into the Canvas board, and now it's available and it's in the right context. We see a lot of evidence that students return to the platform every day, and sometimes even a few times a day, just to see the other students and what they had commented either on their arguments or on the other answers within the discussion. I think it really fosters and facilitates the learning process, and people become very open to reviewing other people's ideas. So one of the things that we measure for every student is their level of collaboration. And the more you are interacting with other students, the less you are in your silo, the better the system will perceive your participation in class. And that's also accounted by the solution. I hope this addresses that a bit, Buffering.
Gad, would you like to add to it?
No, I think that was a great question. I think there was a question very much related to that by JC Anderson. How to introduce the platform for the first time, and it's very much related to that. When the course was fully online, that was part of my introductory email. So in my introductory email to the students, I said we're going to use asynchronous videos that are going to be posted here. I'm going to use synchronous classes on Zoom, and we're going to use Ment. And then usually I add a paragraph that explains essentially what I said in the beginning of this conference call. I said, this is a different type of discussion board where you will be asked to read and create a structured response as a way to create overall knowledge through the entire class by agreeing and disagreeing. So that was very much the way I posted it. And already there was a discussion that was already posted. So the first one was already ready. When it was in-person class, then what I usually did, I waited until the second class. And during the first class, I showed how a class from a previous class looked like. So just to have the model from the beginning of saying this notion of you can add an answer, that's how the graph evolves. And I envision that's the way. And that's like, I would like you to mimic, or at least to produce something like that. So I think usually it was stated from either the beginning or right after the beginning that this is the expectation as to where things are going to take place.
I'd like to add to that from two perspectives. From the head of partnerships perspective, I'd like to add that we try to support in multiple ways. So one of them is that we have videos on YouTube accessible to send to the students on how to, for example, how to create a good answer on Ment.io. How do you provide a good answer on Ment.io? Directing the students towards exactly these areas of there's an argument, there's an answer, and there are arguments pro and against, and the flow of how do you generate a good answer. So that's one way, the different videos that we have on Ment.io. And from my own personal experience, I'd like to share that I find that it takes about 2 to 3 discussions for the students to understand, to grasp why this is different from different platforms, and start generating good answers and good discussions. It's not an instantaneous thing. It doesn't happen immediately. However, once they get it, again, it takes about 2 to 3 discussions. But when they get the hang of it, what it reflects regarding the knowledge in the classroom is wonderful. It reflects, as God mentioned earlier, it is inclusive in the sense that I can see students that I've never heard from before, and they express themselves in a way that I haven't heard in class. And so I guess my point is, even though it is a process that we need to take them through, either with a YouTube video of 3 minutes or an explanation in the classroom, it's very much worthwhile towards in the remaining of the road that we have together. Zvika?
Maria Elena actually asked whether she can see again the sample question and answer. Maybe it will also benefit some of the people who might have joined late. So if that, you can just share your screen.
Yeah,
so they can see an example. While God shares his screen, if you have more questions coming, we are happy the more questions you have, so don't be shy.
So this is an example of one of the discussion. So here, actually, this is actually an example where something came in a discussion in the classroom. I didn't have time to discuss it too much. So what I did, I uploaded a short video to that from a blog and asked them to comment on that. So very much orthogonal to the discussion in the class, and there is no right and wrong answer in this case. It's about the notion of product market fit. And so the people commented on that. As you can see, a fairly heated discussion, because this is something that many of the students are interested in. I saw the question was whether there are photos of the students. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I did not use it. I think for my students, all of them show up with their name here. By the way, I can see here, just to Anat had a comment earlier on the ability to show that something is insightful, vote up and down. That's exactly what you see here. I can see how many students actually saw that comment. And analytics that I find useful, by the way, on that is this, that I can actually see how the discussion evolved, how the opinion of this answer evolved. I find it always a little bit interesting to show them how through their response the things were built, or to some extent there are questions where other people changed, where it's actually, even though it started strong, it actually ended up not as strong. That's actually not something like that. All of these examples, actually, people overall had enough comments. But that's to some extent how the discussion evolved overall. And you can see here, I can see the responses, the agreement and disagreement. I should say this is an undergraduate class, and undergraduate tend to be more it's not disagreeable, but tend to disagree more than MBA students and executive MBA students. So that's why you'll see here a little bit more disagreement than what I usually see in my master students classes. But I don't know, Maria, I know that you asked for that. I'm not sure, is that what you were looking for?
Zvika?
Yeah, so maybe just another word about Maria's question. Like, do we experience self-development in the sense of how students improve their debating skill and so forth? It's surprising how fast the learning curve here is, because the platform is designed to put emphasis on strong and supported arguments. And the more you explain yourself in a clear way, the more support your arguments get, the less clarification requests or anything that may stand out as being vague or not being clear or balanced enough is something that quickly students learn to adjust for. And you can see the trends throughout the course, even when sometimes courses are just 10 or 12 weeks long. You definitely can see that, and this is something that, by the way, we can share through the assessment feature, that students over time improve their participation in class and many other parameters.
And we support the being as transparent as possible with what are they being assessed for, and the fact that they know that it's about engaging with others. As I've shown earlier when I shared my screen, it's about them engaging and viewing other people's answers and taking part and providing robust or rigorous evidence. All of these things encourage them to improve, and they see that reflected on the My Analytics page.
Anita's asking, like, the schools that are using this today. So without naming the numbers, the specific numbers, I will say that the software is widely used by universities in the US, including Wharton and Harvard and Berkeley and Vanderbilt and many, many other universities. Also, we are spread globally. We have clients in Canada, in South America, Europe, Asia. We pretty much have clients everywhere, but the platform usage is growing every month. And we are very, very happy about it. Any more questions here? Maybe Anat, you want to show just the homepage of Ment.io, yes, so people can actually.
Let me just. Okay, so we're very glad that you're here, and we would like to invite you to. I'm sharing my screen, to go to the Ment.io website, use the sign up page, the sign up button, or the get started to start your own team on Ment.io, and inviting either colleagues to start a discussion and kind of test the waters on that discussion. We provide up to 30-day trial on the Ment.io platform. Sorry, I'm getting back to you. The additional piece of information that I'd like to make is that we will be sending all participants today an email, first of all, with a thank you, and also with information, and you're all welcome to contact us for either questions that we hadn't had a chance to answer today, or to discuss a special promotion of during the time of COVID-19. And we really would like to invite you and welcome you to test out Ment.io and see how that feels. And I'd like, Gad, if you would like to say a few words before we thank everybody and conclude.
Yeah, so I'll say I started using that, I'm not sure how long ago, and really through and I think it was a Wharton graduate that introduced me to one of the founders, and since then I can say that I evolved in the way I use it. I started actually use it more broadly than before. Initially I used it the very restrictive way, just for questions that I on current topics. But I would like, the same way you can ask the questions. I'm not part of Ment. That is to be said. I actually really just an interested user and interested in improving education overall. So if you're interested, if there's some question, I'm sure you can ask the people from Ment, and they will be able to answer. If you have a question on how do I integrate in my class, how the students respond. You want to see one more example, really sure, email me, and I'm happy to answer that as well, just as one interested faculty to another interested faculty. So let me offer being a resource as well, primarily as an attempt to try to improve education. I think it's something that it's really at the best interest of all of us that we have better discussion, better educated students, and better classroom management.
Thank you so much. First of all, we really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your experience and being available for answers, for questions from the participants here. I think that this is basically a community of educators who are interested in creating excellent education and helping students improve, engage, create knowledge, generate knowledge. This is what we do. We're here to support that. So please, all participants today, please feel free to reach out to us with any comments, feedback, questions. We really appreciate you joining us today. Gad, Professor Allon, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it all wholeheartedly. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.